we normally pay our subs before we get paid. We understand they're the ones doing the work. We need them there, not worrying about money. We can get them to concentrate on the project, get them done faster, and move on to the next one.
Welcome to Builders, Budgets, and Beers. I'm Reece Barnes, and I started this podcast to have real conversations about money in the building industry, the wins, the mistakes, and everything in between. I believe builders deserve to feel confident about their finances, and that starts by hearing from others who've been through it too. This industry can be slow to change, but the right stories and the right tools can make profitability feel possible. Let's get into it. All righty, Aaron. Mics are hot. We're rolling. Thanks for jumping on the podcast, dude.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, sweet. Well, like we always do on the podcast, go ahead and give the audience a little background on yourself, your experience in construction, what you're doing now, the company that you're with. We can just start from there.
Yeah, no problem. Again, appreciate the opportunity. My name is Aaron Dearborn. I'm the president of a company called Amerail Systems. We are a hotel general contractor specializing in renovating hotels across the country. But I kind of started off in the insurance world, disaster restoration, owning a few businesses here and there throughout my time. Transitioned into general contracting and specializing in hotel renovations.
Okay, beautiful. And what drew you into the hotel renovations, with considering your background?
Just random phone call from somebody one day about 8 years ago, and it kind of led to this. And Amerail, we don't have the greatest name for hotel renovations, like the actual name.
Yeah.
But we started off as a railing company in 1985.
That makes sense.
So American Rail, Amerail, and we specialized in doing railings they're called exterior corridor hotels. It's the old hotels where you walked from the outside into your room.
Of course.
And they all had balconies. So we would do the railing on all those. Those went away with time, as everything does.
Yeah.
And we transitioned into doing all the exterior facade work of hotels. And then, about 5-6 years ago, we transitioned into a full-blown GC. So
love that.
That's kind of our growth and, has followed. And, we've kind of went with the industry as things change. We have and pivot and continue to grow.
Totally. Okay, cool. And I got to ask, like, what was the opportunity, or what was like the moment, I guess, where you guys saw going full blown GC instead of just exteriors making sense?
It was COVID. Early on in COVID, hotels got crushed, so we had lots of time, and we decided to inject some capital into the company. We introduced a whole bunch of technology, hired a whole bunch of people that were ready. And I'm a big believer of build it, so we kind of built the foundation of the company, what we wanted. And then that led to the increase in work and revenue. And that's kind of the way we've kind of approached things. Is each level we want to get to, we kind of build out the infrastructure of the company and then go after the work. So instead of this going straight up and being scattered and going after it and failing, we want successful, stage growth. So
totally. Okay. So you were prepared. And it's like my good friend Cole Meir over at Adaptive. His saying is, the best ability is availability. And that's where that preparation is big, right? You guys were available for the opportunity. You saw it, you were prepared, you had the foundations framework in place to do nice, healthy growth, and you took advantage of it. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. So we took with the hands that we were given and went with it. So.
I love it. Good on you. I mean, I think that's going to be great for our audience. And okay, so we're gonna switch things up a little bit here on the podcast. I'm going to ask you a question, okay, that will drive at least the beginning of this conversation. We might birdwalk a little bit. But the question here is what is the one topic from your perspective that needs the most discussion in the industry that isn't getting talked about enough?
Yeah, if like from our perspective, being a commercial GC, it's why is the general contractor and the subcontractor the bank for the project? Why are we financing it through delayed payments, labor, material payments? It's always baffled me. there's no quick solution to it. You would have to change the mindset of the whole industry.
Yeah.
It'd be an uphill battle, but why, if you think about it, you're lucky if you can get a deposit nowadays, and everything else is based on progress. But if you progress bill, on day 20 of the month for the end of the month, and then you get paid 30 days after that, and then if you pay your sub right away or whatever the terms are with them, your subcontractor isn't getting paid for 60 to 80 days after the project started,
Yeah.
and most of our projects are 3 to 6 months. So why are they carrying the burden of the owner,
Totally.
not willing to make the payment, or not? I mean, they're willing to make the payment, but the way it's structured is very pro owner versus pro the guy doing the work.
Totally. Okay. Well, and so I think this is a great topic, and you like laid out several areas that we could dig into. But like from my perspective, or at least the perspective that I've built having been an adaptive, is like a reason why why does the GC and sub have to be the bank is because of the amount of hands that money has to pass through and the proper accounting and visibility that has to be taken in order to follow that is so brutal and manual,
Oh, yeah.
right? And like we're an AI native construction accounting platform. So like the vision is like you position yourself in the GC's world, right? You automate those flows, and then you start to work with the subcontractors, the developers, banks, all of that. So then it's a much faster process for the sub to get the AP or their AR to the GC's AP. They can track it, they can understand it, they can request for it to the developer bank, whatever, and then it starts to pass back through, right? So you can clean up that line. Would you agree that a lot of the challenge is the GC needs the money to cover the sub has to wait for the GC to get the money to get them paid? Would you agree that it's that like operational challenge that's the headache, or where do you think that like the biggest room for improvement or opportunity is to prevent GCs and subs from being the bank?
Yeah, it's really the customer of who you're dealing with. If you can lay it out in a good way where we have some customers that will, once they get to know us, they know that we'll get a deposit from them, and that's mostly just for mobilization, making sure our sub gets paid that first month, and kind of walking them through our process and understanding why we require or ask for this.
Yep.
And they can see it then, but with banks involved, the more people involved, the worse it gets. And we're fortunate here where we normally pay our subs before we get paid.
Okay.
We understand they're the ones doing the work. They're the ones, we need them there, not worrying about money,
Of course.
And so we can get that thought out of their head. We can get them to concentrate on the project, get them done faster, and move on to the next one.
Totally.
So we kind of wear the burden of that, but it's such backwards thinking with just, if you're dealing with large conglomerate corporations, or even or publicly owned companies, they always use, well, we have to worry about our shareholders,
Yep.
and, well, you should worry about the project getting done on time and on budget, and money moves things,
Of course.
So, yeah.
Okay. Well, so, and that's, I hear that, and you guys are commercial, obviously, right? Do you mind giving like a ballpark in your top line, or you can even be units, just to like, so the audience knows like the size of organization you are?
Yeah.
It can be ballpark, up to you.
Yeah. 25 to 40 projects a year across the country. Renovations run anywhere from 2 to 7, 8, 9 million. So,
sizable organization.
Yeah.
And the reason I wanted to ask that is because like I've talked to a lot of like residential contractors as well as commercial, industrial, stuff like that. And the reason I wanted to understand your size is because even a contractor of your guys' size have the same or similar problems, right? And where I'm really going with this is you made the comment like you guys pay your subs early, right? Even if you don't have the receivables to cover it. So that's where this conversation of the GC now becomes the bank, because you're funding the product, you're front loading it to keep your subs happy, assumptively, right?
Oh yeah, because you're still on the hook for any liquidated damages or to keep it on schedule.
Yeah.
So it's such a double-edged sword that it's just, to me, it's one of those things that you just think about all the time. You're like, how do you even change the mindset of the industry? And you you could, I guess, one job at a time, but it would take a lot of momentum.
Of course. Yeah. And it's like anytime you're changing like a society, right? You can say like it's as large as the construction vertical is really like a society, right? Like that's a lot of change. But like you're taking the approach, and you made a comment about deposits. We'll get into that. But you pay your subs before you get your receivables or whatever it is. Again, to keep them happy, to lessen the stress on their end so they're not worried about money. They can focus on the work, they can deliver the quality that they want to, right? How did you make that decision instead of like essentially like guaranteeing deposits or like a more like fast or a faster AR process? How did you land on paying the subs faster? Go ahead.
We've always done it here, in 40 some years. It's just been our MO, and that's how we keep the subs that we like, is by taking care of them, and they'll go above and beyond for you, because they know they're going to get their money every 2 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever we come to an agreement with.
Right.
Our contracts still read, "We'll paid upon payment."
Right.
We will, like with retainage and stuff like that across the country, we will withhold that until the final payment, but that's usually minuscule, compared to the large size of the project.
5-10%. Is that what you guys are doing on retainage?
Yeah, and then usually upon completion, half of that, and then once the final payment's received.
Okay.
But it's owners, as in anybody, they don't like to give up their money.
Of course,
our customers. So it's always a nice dance to get it. And we found with communication, open communication, laying out like the needs of the project, because most people don't understand what really goes into it to get a project started. So all the materials you have to purchase, everything that needs to be on site day one. And if you can lay that off or lay that out in a good way to the customer, sometimes they're a little willing or more willing to kind of release some funds up front and then start the progress payments,
Totally. Okay. Yeah. Well, and so we're getting into the deposit conversation, and that to me is like I grew up with a contractor. My wife's family is in construction. Like all my friends are in construction, right? So I'm like familiar with it. Albeit I've never like really worked in the business of a construction company. So it makes a ton of sense to someone that's outside looking in. I mean, like that's only obvious that you guys capture a deposit, but where do you like for the customer, of course they don't want to give up the money, but they want the project done, right? So it's like, shouldn't there be an assumption that they have to pay for this stuff on the front end? Like, it's not just like snap your fingers, construction starts, there's permits, there's planning, there's pre-con, there's materials, like you said. Why is that a dance? Why isn't that just assumed by the customer? Maybe that's where we should start to change the conversation.
If they don't have to, if you don't ask for it, they're not going to give it, because it's the longer they can keep it in their pocket, the more money they can make on it. We deal with a lot of publicly traded or REITs or, so they're very sticklers and watch every penny, and they need to keep their money as long as possible. So, and then, we have to follow all the AIA guidelines and, all the billings per AIA and, all that fun stuff that comes with commercial construction. Yeah. And, they'll even like the fun ones are the ones that will kick it back. We're like, well, this doesn't seem right. Or we don't agree with the progress on this line item, let's revisit it. And they delay it another week or two. And it's just,
it's a game, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But usually once you build a good relationship, it usually takes care of itself, and they understand that, from their standpoint, they don't want to give any money up front, not knowing the product's going to be what they were buying. So they're always hesitant on their end.
Of course. Okay. Well, and so a little earlier you mentioned like it would have to be like changing the industry, right? Or the conversation in the industry. And like, then you could start to pick it apart and be like, okay, maybe the customer, like it's just like better expectations of the sales process, right? And when we're winning the work, outlining expectations, being like, hey, this is how we do things, deposits, this is what it should cover. But is there anywhere else in the process that you're like, if you could just like wave a wand and like solve this problem, like where do you think it lies? Or is it just in the customer and like getting the money from them and everything else would run smoothly?
There's financing involved, banks involved, other investors in the property. Our niche in the last few years has been, hotel owners that own 10 to 50 hotels. So they're one decision maker, which is the key to success. Is having
Yeah.
less people involved in decision making has always been easier for us. If there is no good way, it's just finding what works for that individual customer of yours, and trying to figure out what makes them work and how does the deal work for them.
Sure. Sure. Okay, cool. Well, and so even if we just go back in like the hotel renovation space, like you mentioned like internet or publicly traded REITs, stuff like that. Like, are you like doing deals with like Hilton, or you mentioned niche? Like, how do you pick and like identify those opportunities?
So actually, hotels are all franchises, or 99% of them
Okay.
are franchises. So they're owned by individuals, or large investment
Okay.
groups, or large banks, or investment firms. And so the brands, with a franchise, you buy a business in a box. They tell you what to do, how to do it, how to run the business, what's it supposed to look like, the products inside of it.
Yeah.
And so, we work mostly with Marriott, Hilton, IHG, and all
Okay.
their brands underneath their umbrellas.
Yeah.
And so, their own, if you had the funds, you could go build your own. You could go buy one, pay the franchise fee, pay all the royalties, the advertising fees every month with them.
Mhm.
But it seems to be the cost lately. It's very cost prohibitive. To build a new hotel's $20 million for a Hampton Inn in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Wild.
Yeah, it's just crazy. But it seems like most ownership groups own 5 to 50 hotels. The larger REITs own 50 to 500. So
Yeah.
yeah. And so they have a little more power with the brands. It's a question of quantity over quality. Do
Yeah.
you want to work with you're guaranteed work by working with a large REIT, but it comes with a price,
Of course.
of financing it for them.
Of course. Well, okay, and that's where so like when you mentioned like these are all franchises, right? It's like they're typically owned by individuals. You mentioned that like the less people you have to deal with typically means it's easier to get your billing, right? So then you can
Yep.
take care of your subs. But but then on the other hand, like there are the larger REITs, the larger organizations, they're owning multiple of these locations, right? That to me sounds like it could be like a repeatable process when it comes to like setting expectations on the front end of the deal with the deposits. But it doesn't sound like that's the case, because like if you're going to be doing like you're going to go in with a REIT and they have 50 hotels, right? And you win the work to do the renovations on all of them. That could be obnoxious, but let's just use that as the example,
Yeah.
right? Couldn't you go in at that point? It's like this is repeatable. Like they're the same Hampton Inns. We know what we're going to do to the rooms, exteriors, and then we could bake all of this into a pre-com process to get accurate deposits and then have that negotiated before the contract's signed.
Yeah, and that's once you get in with a new customer and you can kind of build a good relationship,
Mhm.
they are more willing to do that.
Mhm.
Just that initial, cracking the door, getting in is always the difficult dance. You don't want to seem like you're too much of a pain,
Yeah.
at first. So it's that delicate dance of what are you trying to accomplish, and do you want the work or do you want to get paid too? And they do have a lot of power within the brands specifically, just
Brand
based
meaning
on
like Hilton or
yeah,
whatever.
Hilton, just based on their purchasing power and how big they are.
Sure.
And so they and with the franchises, they have to renew their license every 7, 14, 15 years or so. And at that time, the brands make them renovate. So,
That makes sense.
if you do good, what's good about our business is if you do good, you're going to have a repeat client in 7
Totally.
years usually. So,
Totally.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I got to ask, like, what is it like negotiating with these brands? Like when you're like getting in there, like, what is that like?
It's not bad. What we negotiate with the brands, like, so if we're a design build firm, so we'll do the design, architecture, interior design, and then we submit it to the brands for their approval. Um, that's where you're negotiating is you're trying to find waivers to get reduced scope. A lot of the big push in the select service hotel world, the Hamptons, the Courtyards, Holiday Inns, has been converting rooms that have bathtubs to showers.
Okay.
And it's, most business travelers prefer a shower. So these old hotels that were built for, traveling soccer teams with kids and all that stuff are now business hotels.
Yeah.
And so, one of those conversions costs 5 to 7,000 a room.
Yeah.
And so you're doing 100, 200 rooms at a hotel. It adds up really quick. And
Totally.
so what we like to do is we'll try to negotiate with the brand to reduce that down to, 10 rooms or something like that. Or, we know what the limit is of what they'll allow. So we're able to, negotiate with the brand. It's a lot of back and forth over a month or two of trying to prove your case, but it
Sure.
goes a long way with the ownerships.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Now, and you said you guys started, or rather you pivoted into becoming a GC during COVID.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, like a lot of these, that example makes a ton of sense. Like hotels 15, 20 years ago was like traveling soccer teams, families, like maybe like, whatever. Right. And we're going to showers. But how did you like see this opportunity with COVID, knowing that like people weren't traveling and like the bulk of people that are staying at these hotels are business people? Like, what was kind of like the vision there? Because I feel like it was all remote, all remote, all remote. No one's traveling for work. No one's doing this stuff. And now you've like kind of found yourself in this great opportunity where it's like we're doing all these conversions. We have the relationships. We've got essentially like guaranteed pipeline if we can like keep the relationship strong. How did you see that coming, or did you?
We say dumb luck, but it's kind of, you kind of put, we have a good knack here at Amerail to kind of put ourselves in the owners or like what's the end customer's like foot, or shoes.
Mm-hmm.
How do they look at things? How do they, what are they going to anticipate at this hotel? Kind of look at the locale of it. If
Okay.
you're, we've done a lot of work up in Wyoming lately, and it's since COVID, that's a major stopping off point before people got to Yellowstone.
Sure.
So a lot of these hotels that were, dogs, they weren't performing well, are now performing well because everyone's traveling to Yellowstone because, it was more a couple of years ago because they were trapped in their homes. They needed to get out after COVID.
Sure.
And it's kind of morphed into, you know, um, everyone's kind of back to traveling, full time and trying to, more of they want an experience type of lifestyle versus
Mm-hmm.
a materials type of lifestyle.
Sure.
So that's really driven the travel sector. And with that, you kind of take that in the back of your head and kind of what do we need to make this hotel room accommodate to now? So as people's tastes change or trends change, you just got to stay on top of it.
Sure. Sure. Okay. And you said that these renovations are happening like every 7 to 15 years, call
Yeah.
it. Do you ever get like these larger brands following these trends of what the consumer wants and pivot earlier? Or is it almost always like we've got 7 years of data, we're following consumer trends, we're making it then? How does that work?
All their research R&D teams are constantly tracking what's going on in the world. And
Yeah.
if you think about these large brands are global, so you got to keep track of what's going on in China, the U.S., Canada, and how does it affect their product and their end user. So they have great teams. They're constantly reinventing themselves.
Yeah.
Every 10 years or so, they come out with a new design scheme or a new prototype that is going to have to be seen. Within the 3 to 5 years, you'll see it. A lot of these brands, reinvent themselves and change, the color schemes. So
Yeah, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, and so how long have you been in construction, Aaron?
20 plus years.
How
Yeah.
long? I'm sorry.
20 plus years.
20 plus. Okay. So like, and like, obviously we started the conversations like, why is the GC the sub bank? We're talking about like pipeline relationships, all these different things. We have a lot of young listeners, in our audience. What would be like the biggest win advice that you would give yourself when you started your career that would have like changed how it went or that you wish you knew?
Don't be too proud or prideful or, don't
Yeah.
think you know everything. Take advice, look at things from every angle. Talk to, older people in the industry. they have been through everything that we're going through.
Yeah.
Maybe not as fast as the world is right now, but most of the time they've seen what we're seeing, and just a different, maybe a dollar amount or thing, but usually the problems are usually the same. So be open to advice. Admit when you're wrong.
Yeah.
We're here at Amerail. We're willing to try anything once, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, figure out a way to make it work or figure out a different strategy. So,
Yeah.
take some risk. With technology these days and information that's out there, your risk making or risk taking is very calculated. You can find information on anyone when it comes to customers. Did they ever have a bankruptcy? What do they own? What's all this stuff? So you
Yeah.
can qualify your customer, nowadays a lot easier.
Totally. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
okay. And so you talk about like don't be too proud, right? Like seek advice, accept or like acknowledge when you're wrong, right? Take risks, calculated risks. I'm just curious, like what would you advise the younger generation of contractors do when it comes to getting in the room with the people that they want advice from? Because there's so many like easy ways, like LinkedIn. Like I'm pretty sure we got connected with your marketing team, and it was just like, yeah, sure, let's do this, let's line it up. Do you advise like these contractors just to like reach out to the leaders that they're looking forward to and just like put time on their calendar, or how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's in our industry very popular, so it's great for the commercial construction, hotel
Mhm.
renovation or hotel construction. Industry forums, conferences are always good events. Anything local regarding building or construction, any types of local groups that can kind of put you in those rooms. um, and most of the time these people are willing, or they love it to give their advice, because they kind of feel passed over sometimes as their careers progress, and
Totally.
looking for somebody to help mentor or protege type situation.
Yeah.
So it's timing and luck, and just trying to figure out where they're going to be, or the best way to approach them.
Totally. Well, as it goes back to like, the best ability is availability. Like you got to go to those things. You got to go to those networking events. You've got to be like talking to individuals and know that it's going to take 50 or 100 conversations before the one that's like really meaningful is going to stick. So, what conferences would you say like these people should go to, or events?
With our industry, there's several. Um, there's some deal making conferences where people are buying and selling hotels, called the Hunter Conference. That's in the spring in Atlanta.
Okay.
There's some design conferences regarding the hospitality industry called Alice. That's in LA in January. There's a HD Expo in Vegas, which is hospitality design. And then the big one's a BDNY, which is Boutique Design New York, and that's in the fall in New York City.
Okay.
And the other conference is called the Lodging Conference, which is very hotel owner driven.
Yeah.
So they're out there. It's just which one's the best for what you're trying to accomplish. They're all kind of geared towards something specific within hotel renovations and construction.
Okay, and that was going to be my next question. So these are conferences full of contractors that specialize in like hotel renovations.
Designers, architects, contractors, owners, customers, so, and vendors, all the vendors that supply into these fields. So, yeah.
I had no idea that hotel. I
It's
mean, it
a
makes a ton of
whole,
sense.
yeah, yeah.
It makes a ton of sense, right? It's like we got 200 rooms in a hotel times however many hotels in a metropolitan, right? So it's like, of course, there are contractors that are doing this. I had no idea though that there were that many conferences and
But
opportunities.
yeah, there's a lot. I mean, you could find one a month, and then think about everything that goes into a hotel material wise. The amount of flooring, vinyl wallpaper, all the furniture. Um, on a typical renovation, an owner spending $1 million to $1.5 million just on FF&E.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Okay. Well, Aaron, I appreciate you jumping on the show. Is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with that we haven't covered already?
No, it's just if they have any interest in Amerail, we're always looking for, good people. We're looking for customers. You can always check us out at amerailsys.com/insights,
Okay.
hotel insights, if you'd like to find some more information. But it's a cool industry. I get jacked up about it, which, is hard nowadays to actually find something you're really passionate about. And what's great is it's construction. You can, if you don't like it, it's going to change tomorrow. So
Totally. Are you guys hiring?
we're always looking for good people. We try to find the smartest, most talented people in the industry or in construction. We're always looking for people, and it's a fun industry because you're always, you're in a different city every few months, and you never know what projects are going to lead to.
Totally. Do you have any like open roles right now, or are you just like taking general applicants?
Um, we always look. So, project managers, site supers, sales. We're always looking for people.
Okay. Okay, sweet.
Yeah.
Well, for the listeners out there, if you're wanting to get into the world of hotel renovations, Amerail is the number one hotel renovation contractor in the country. So you should certainly reach out to Aaron. I appreciate you again. Thank you for the conversation. And if there's anything I can do for you, let me know.
No problem. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.